She is completely unstable. My brother didn't even flinch when he said it. He straightened his cufflinks, glanced at the lawyer sitting beside him, and then looked at the mediator like he was doing everyone in the room a favor. She has been erratic, emotionally volatile, and frankly unfit to hold any position in this company. For the good of our family and our father's legacy, I am requesting full transfer of majority shares to my control. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I looked at the clock on the wall behind his head. 11 minutes. That was how long he had before everything he thought he'd built came apart. Have you ever sat in a room and listened to someone who was supposed to love you, describe you like a problem to be solved? Drop a yes in the comments. I want to know how many of us have been there. My brother's name is Marcus. He is 41 years old, drives a Range Rover he can't afford, and has been slowly bleeding our late father's construction company dry for the better part of 3 years. He is charming in the way that people are charming when they've spent a lifetime practicing it. He remembers birthdays. He laughs at the right moments. He sends flowers when your dog dies. And the whole time he is smiling at you, he is counting what you have that he doesn't. I am Claire. I'm 32, and I am the reason this mediation was called in the first place. Our father, Robert, passed away 18 months ago from a sudden cardiac event. He was 67, stubborn as granite, and the kind of man who built things with his hands before he built them on paper. He started Callaway Construction out of a garage in Mississauga in 1987 with a used transit van and a brother who eventually walked away with a check and no hard feelings. By the time he died, the company had contracts across the GTA, a workforce of over 200, and a portfolio of commercial properties worth somewhere north of $12 million. He left it to both of us equally. Marcus had expected more. I knew this because 3 weeks after the funeral, while I was still sleeping 4 hours a night and eating crackers over the sink, my brother sat across from me at the kitchen table in our childhood home and said, very calmly, that he thought it made more sense for him to take operational control. He was older, he had more experience, he had been working alongside Dad for years. I had been living in Vancouver, working in corporate auditing, keeping a deliberate distance from the family business, because my father and I had agreed, a long time ago, that it was better that way. I told Marcus I needed time to think. What I actually needed was to make a phone call. I called my father's longtime accountant, a woman named Patricia, who had been doing the books for Callaway since before I was born. I asked her how things looked. There was a pause on the line that lasted just a second too long. She said she would send me some files. What arrived in my inbox that evening changed everything. Over the preceding 26 months, Marcus had been quietly restructuring. Contracts were being awarded to a sub-trade company called Norfield Solutions, a company that, according to Ontario corporate registry records, had been incorporated 18 months earlier under the name of Marcus's girlfriend. Invoices from Norfield were consistently 10 to 15% above market rate. The overcharges, compounded across dozens of contracts, added up to just over $800,000. Not dramatic enough to trigger an automatic audit flag in any single quarter. Spread carefully, methodically, almost artistically across the ledger. My brother had been stealing from our father, and now he wanted the rest. I could have confronted him that night. I could have called a lawyer, filed a complaint with the CRA, gone to the police. I thought about it. I sat at my kitchen table in Vancouver with Patricia's files on one screen and a glass of red wine I never touched on the other, and I thought very carefully about what I wanted. I didn't want to win an argument. I wanted it to be over, permanently. So I did what auditors do. I started building a file. I flew back to Mississauga. I told Marcus I had decided he was right, that he knew the business better than I did, that I was willing to discuss transferring my operational vote to him while we figured out a longer-term structure. He looked at me over dinner with something that was almost warmth. He ordered an expensive bottle of wine. He talked about Dad the way people do when they're trying to rewrite history into something more flattering to themselves. I smiled and asked questions and ordered the salmon and said almost nothing of consequence for 3 hours. Then I took a job at the company. Marcus thought it was his idea. That was important. I had floated the suggestion carefully, almost reluctantly. I said I felt guilty being an absentee shareholder. I said I wanted to understand what Dad had built. I said maybe I could help with some of the financial reporting, just temporarily, just to get my footing. Marcus said that was actually a great idea. He said having me involved would look good to the banks. He gave me an office on the second floor with a window that faced the parking lot. He gave me read access to the accounting system. He introduced me to the staff as his sister, back home, learning the ropes. He had no idea I had spent the previous 8 years auditing mid-size construction firms for a living. I settled in quietly. I brought coffee for people. I asked questions that sounded naive. I took notes in a paper notebook. which meant no digital trail for Marcus to find. I rebuilt the entire financial picture from scratch, transaction by transaction, using the access I had been handed openly and legally. Every Friday, I sent Patricia a summary. Every Sunday, she sent back her notes. We were methodical. We were patient. We did not rush. The picture that emerged was worse than the initial files suggested. Norfield was only part of it. There were also consulting fees paid to a numbered company that traced back to Marcus's financial advisor. There were equipment rentals billed at twice the going rate from a supplier Marcus had gone to high school with. There were 2 commercial properties in the estate portfolio that had been quietly listed for sale without shareholder approval, with Marcus's personal real estate agent holding the listing. And there was a line of credit against the business, taken out 8 months after Dad died, for $400,000, with no corresponding capital investment to show for it. In total, between the diversions, the inflated contracts, and the unapproved debt, Marcus had exposed the company to over $1.4 million in losses or liability. The company that my father had spent 35 years building. I felt something settle in my chest when I finally saw the full number. Not rage, not grief. Something colder and cleaner than either of those things. It was the feeling of knowing exactly what happens next. I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, I called a litigator named Diane, who had been recommended to me by a colleague in Vancouver, someone who specialized in shareholder disputes and had a particular reputation for being very quiet and very thorough, right up until the moment she was not. I sent Diane everything. She reviewed it for 10 days. Then she called me back and said 3 words. This is RICO adjacent. Then she said, in Canada, we call it fraud, theft over $5,000, and breach of fiduciary duty. The exposure is significant, but I need you to do something for me. She needed me to wait. Not because we didn't have enough, we had enough. But if we moved now, Marcus would lawyer up, negotiate a settlement, and walk away, having paid back a fraction of what he'd taken in exchange for the charges going away quietly. He had already demonstrated that he was comfortable with risk. He needed to demonstrate it one more time, in a setting where it would be documented and irreversible. I went back to work on Monday like nothing had changed. 2 months later, Marcus called a shareholder mediation. This was actually his idea, and I had done nothing to stop it. He had been growing impatient. My presence in the office made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite name. I had been asking questions about the Norfield contracts. I had flagged 2 invoices to the bookkeeper, casually, like I was just confused. I had asked the equipment rental supplier if they had a rate sheet I could file. Small things, individually meaningless. Together, they were the sound of a net being drawn in. He wanted me out before I looked too closely. He decided the cleanest way to do it was to use the mediation to establish that I was an unstable shareholder whose involvement was damaging to the business. He had a psychiatrist lined up, a man named Dr. Fowler, who had agreed to testify that based on what Marcus had described of my behavior, I displayed signs of emotional dysregulation and was unfit to hold a position in a closely held family corporation. Based on what Marcus had described, he had never actually met me. The mediation was held in a boardroom on the 14th floor of a building on Bay Street. The mediator was a retired judge named Hartley. Around the table, Marcus, his lawyer, Dr. Fowler, 2 representatives from the company's bank, and me. I came alone. Marcus had interpreted that as weakness. I watched him clock it when I walked in, the slight relaxation of his shoulders, the private satisfaction that I hadn't brought reinforcements. He had 4 people in his corner. I had a leather portfolio and a cup of coffee I'd bought downstairs. He began. He described my erratic behavior since our father's death. He mentioned that I had taken time off work in Vancouver, which was true bereavement leave, completely documented, which he was welcome to characterize however he liked. He mentioned that I had been distant and uncommunicative during the estate settlement process, that I had failed to attend 2 board meetings, that my involvement in the company had been disruptive. He said I had been badgering staff with questions, creating a climate of anxiety, and showing clear signs of being unable to handle the pressure of shared ownership. Dr. Fowler nodded at appropriate intervals. I watched Marcus the way you watch weather, not because it surprises you, but because you want to know exactly when it turns. He finished. Hartley looked at me. Miss Calloway, you've heard your brother's concerns. Do you have a response? Marcus leaned forward slightly. He wanted the outburst. He wanted the tears or the raised voice or the long defensive monologue that would prove his point for him. He had been baiting those reactions out of me my entire life. At dinner tables, in living rooms, in our father's hospital room 2 days before he died. He knew how to find the places that hurt and press until something broke. I had spent the last 14 months making sure there was nothing left to break. I looked at Marcus. I kept my face open, neutral, curious, like I was meeting him for the first time and finding him mildly interesting. "Thank you," I said. I turned to Hartley. "I appreciate my brother sharing his perspective. I do want to note for the record that Dr. Fowler has never examined me, which I imagine will be relevant when we get to the portion of today's meeting where I share what I've been doing for the past 14 months. Marcus's lawyer put his hand on Marcus's arm. A small movement, the kind that means hold. I did not hold. I opened my portfolio and placed a bound report on the table. 38 pages, tabbed, with a cover sheet that read, Independent Financial Review Callaway Construction Limited, prepared for shareholder mediation proceedings. These are copies for everyone at the table, I said. I slid one to Hartley, one to the bank representatives, one to Marcus's lawyer. I did not give one to Marcus. He would have to ask, and I wanted him to ask. "What is this?" Marcus's lawyer said. "A complete audit of the company's financials from the date of Robert Callaway's death to 90 days ago," I said. "Conducted using records I accessed through my role as a shareholder and part-time financial analyst at Callaway Construction, a role I was invited into by my brother. I'd like to walk everyone through the key findings." The room had gone very quiet. I started at the beginning. Norfield Solutions. The incorporation date, the registered director, the contract history, the invoice analysis, the rate comparison against market benchmarks for comparable subtrades in the GTA. I was not dramatic. I did not editorialize. I read the numbers the way you read numbers, when you have been reading numbers professionally for almost a decade, which is to say with complete flatness, because the numbers do not need help. The numbers are already loud. Hartley had stopped writing. He was reading. Marcus had gone the color of old concrete. In total, I said, the Norfield contracts resulted in an estimated overpayment of $832,000 over 26 months. This is not a rounding error. This is not an oversight. The company is registered to a person with a documented personal relationship to my brother. The contracts were approved exclusively by my brother without shareholder consultation as required under our articles, and the billing pattern is consistent with deliberate fragmentation designed to avoid triggering our internal review threshold. Marcus opened his mouth. I did not stop. I moved to the consulting fees, the equipment rental, the properties listed without approval. I placed the listing agreements on the table. I placed the line of credit documents beside them. I noted, without raising my voice, that the $400,000 borrowed against the business appeared to have been used to pay down a personal mortgage, a fact I had confirmed through land registry records that are public in Ontario. "This is fabricated," Marcus said. His voice was very controlled. "She's been in that office for 3 months, and she's telling you she cracked some kind of conspiracy? Come on, she's unstable. That's the whole point. She built a fantasy." "The records are sourced and cited on pages 12 through 29, I said. "Every document has a registry or corporate source listed in the footnotes. I'd invite anyone at this table to verify them independently." Hartley looked at the bank representatives. One of them was on page 17. She did not look up. Marcus shifted tactics. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He was sweating now in a way that had nothing to do with the room temperature. "She signed an agreement," he said, placing a document in front of Hartley. 14 months ago, 2 weeks after the funeral. She signed over her voting proxy to me for a period of 2 years to allow uninterrupted management of the business during the transition. She agreed to this. She just doesn't remember because she was grieving and not thinking clearly. Hartley examined it. "Miss Callaway, is this your signature?" I looked at the document. I recognized it. It had been buried in a stack of estate papers, presented to me by Marcus's lawyer as a routine administrative document during the worst week of my life. I had signed it. "That looks like my signature," I said. Marcus exhaled. "However," I said, "I direct the mediator's attention to Section 4 of our shareholder agreement, which I've included as Appendix C in the report." I turned to the relevant tab. The proxy document my brother is presenting was executed without independent legal counsel being present for my review, which is a condition of validity under our articles. I was not advised of that requirement. I have an affidavit from the estate lawyer confirming that he advised only one party in that transaction, which was Marcus. I paused. The proxy is void. The silence that followed had a different quality than the earlier ones. It was the silence of people recalculating. Marcus looked at his lawyer. His lawyer did not look back. One of the bank representatives cleared his throat. "Mr. Callaway," he said, and the use of the singular was not lost on anyone. "We're going to need to pause this proceeding and speak with our risk team." Marcus stood up. His chair scraped back hard. "This is a setup," he said, loudly enough that I was certain the people in the hallway could hear him. She's been in that office running a campaign against me since day one. She came home specifically to destroy what I built. Dad trusted me with this company, and she's been sitting there for months just waiting to. Marcus. I said his name quietly. Just his name. Nothing else. He stopped. I had not raised my voice once in the entire proceeding. In contrast, he had just demonstrated, in front of a retired judge, 2 bank representatives, and a mediator of record, exactly what emotional dysregulation looks like. I let that sit for a moment. Then I opened to the last tab in my portfolio and removed 2 documents. I anticipated that today's mediation might not result in a voluntary resolution, I said. So I took some steps last week. I placed the first document in front of Hartley. This is confirmation of a formal complaint filed with the Ontario Securities Commission regarding the undisclosed conflict of interest in the Northfield contracts. The case number is at the top. I placed the second document beside it. This is a notice of referral to the Toronto Police Service Financial Crimes Unit. The referral was submitted jointly by myself and the company's accountant, Patricia, who has been retained as a cooperating witness. Marcus sat back down, not because he chose to, because his legs appeared to stop working properly. The threshold for fraud over $5,000 under the criminal code is met several times over, I continued. The breach of fiduciary duty exposure is civil, separate, and ongoing. I have also filed for an injunction this morning to freeze all company accounts and suspend Marcus's signing authority pending the outcome of both investigations. A copy of the injunction application is being served to his counsel right now. I glanced at the door. On cue, Diane walked in. She was carrying a second copy of the injunction application, which she handed to Marcus's lawyer without a word, and then took the empty seat beside me. She had been outside the whole time. Marcus looked at her. He looked at me. He looked at the report in Hartley's hands. He looked at the bank representatives, one of whom was now typing on her phone with a focus that made clear she was not checking messages. "You did all of this," he said. His voice was flat. "You came home and spent 14 months building a case instead of just talking to me." I considered that for a moment. I thought about the kitchen table conversation 3 weeks after the funeral. The bottle of wine he ordered to celebrate my agreement. The office with the parking lot view. The way he introduced me to staff. Learning the ropes. "I tried talking to you," I said. "You told me Dad always said you were the one who understood the business." Then you poured more wine. He had nothing to say to that. Diane spoke for the first time. "My client is prepared to offer a resolution that keeps this matter out of open court. Marcus Calloway will resign from all company positions effective immediately. He will enter a repayment agreement for the full documented loss of $1.4 million, secured against his personal assets. He will sign a release of all claims to the voting proxy and agree to binding arbitration for any future shareholder disputes." She slid the agreement across the table. "In exchange, my client will not pursue additional criminal charges beyond the existing OSC and police referrals, which proceed independently regardless." Marcus picked up the document. He put it down. He picked it up again. His lawyer leaned over and said something quietly. Marcus shook his head once. His lawyer said something else. Marcus stared at the table for a long time. He signed. Outside, Bay Street was doing what Bay Street does in November, which is to be gray and cold and completely indifferent to anything happening 14 floors above it. I stood on the sidewalk and let the air do something to the inside of my chest that felt like clearing. Patricia called while I was standing there. I told her it was done. She went quiet for a moment and then said she wished Robert could have seen it. I told her I thought he probably had, in whatever way people do. The company went through a restructuring over the following months. New management was brought in. The bank renewed the credit facility once the accounts were unfrozen and the audit was complete. 3 of the longest-serving site supervisors, men who had worked for my father for over a decade, came to the office one afternoon with coffee and just sat across from my desk and said they were glad someone had paid attention. I thought about that word. Attention. That is the whole game, really. Not being louder or stronger or more aggressive. Just being more patient, more precise, and more willing to pay attention than the person who thinks they have already won. Marcus's repayment is structured over 5 years. The first payment was made on time. I don't think about him much. I deleted his number from my phone the day the agreement was executed, which felt less dramatic than I had imagined and more like closing a browser tab you'd left open by accident for too long. I kept the office on the 2nd floor. I had the window replaced. It faces the yard now, the equipment bays and the supply compound, and the crews coming in at 7 in the morning. My father used to stand at a window just like it at the original yard in Mississauga, coffee in hand, watching the day start. I did not know that until one of the site supervisors told me. He said Robert used to say that if you want to understand a business, you stand where the work begins. I think about that most mornings. Some people take what they're given. Some people take what isn't theirs. And some people, the quiet ones you stop worrying about because they seem too sad and too lost to be a threat, they are busy paying attention. They are busy building something you cannot see yet. And when you finally look up from whatever you've been counting, they are already standing in the place you thought was yours. My father built something real, and it is still standing.